My background is in plant ecology and landscape ecology, and I thought I would start off just to say a bit about landscape ecology, because I'm not sure how many of you would be familiar with that idea. There are three main concepts in landscape ecology. Scale, which is, are you looking at a site? Are you looking at a local government area? Are you looking at the entire region of Melbourne? The second concept is configuration. So where are the patches? How big are they? How well connected are they? And which ones are connected? And the third concept is the most important one, which is context. So that's understanding if you have a site, what's in the surrounding landscape and how does that modify what you observe happening in the site itself. So to continue on with that idea of context, I thought I would just make a comparison between Westgate Park and Blackburn Lake, which are both very similar size patches. They have similar characteristics in that there's a wetland area, there's areas of important habitat for native plants and animals. But if you think about it, the landscape that Blackburn Lake occurs in is quite different to where Westgate Park is situated. So, Westgate Park is largely surrounded by industrial areas, and there's very little of similar vegetation nearby to be connected to. Blackburn Lake is surrounded by residential area that is in the bushland style of residential development. So it's actually part of a much broader network of native plant communities. And I say this not to say one's better or one's worse. I was thinking about it, and there's an analogy between two different types of metal. So I think Blackburn Lake is like copper. If you think about the vegetation that's there, it's relatively easily accessible. But if you think about Melbourne's train system, if you take a length of copper out of that train system, the network grinds to a halt, and a lot of commuters are really inconvenienced. So Blackburn Lake, in a sense, is like that one length of copper in that broader network. So it's very important because it's part of a network. And if you think about Westgate Park, where it's on its own, it's quite rare in that setting. It's probably more like something maybe Colton, which is in our mobile phones, and you get it from the People's Democratic Republic of Congo, and it serves a very specific purpose. But because of its rarity and because of that need for it, there needs to be a lot more discussion around how do you actually manage the values and the role of it, and how do you want to use that site. Because it's isolated, in some ways it actually raises its importance in the role that it plays in the broader landscape. So the animals and birds and plants that are using that site, they don't really have any alternatives. So it's important that it's a large space so that you can have those larger population numbers and a much more healthy population dynamic than if it was a very small space. And also for the people who are nearby, that space is very important because there's nothing like it anywhere within a walking distance. So I think Lynn was talking about, or maybe it was Naomi, talking about the workers from those industrial areas coming and using the site during their lunch breaks, because it's and really valuing that sense of being in the bush. So in that respect, it plays a very unique role in this landscape because it is unique. So what can we be doing to foster and enhance biodiversity in urban areas? So the work that happens within a conservation reserve or a site with remnant vegetation is really important. And I think the widespread movement of friends groups and people who are really looking after their local bushland has been really important in terms of maintaining those spaces over a long period of time. And for that reason, I think that we shouldn't shy away in urban areas from the idea of thinking about gardening for conservation. It's very difficult to maintain sort of natural processes such as fire and things that are really important in a large space like Wilson's Prom, for example, in a very small urban setting. So there needs to be an alternative way of keeping some of those important processes happening, but in a way that works within that urban setting. So we have a lot of parks, but we also have people's own residential areas, we have streetscapes, we have a number of places where there's actually a big opportunity for biodiversity, which we're not actually capitalising on at the moment. Firstly, I think if we want to start having interventions in those larger landscapes, those residential areas and commercial districts, we need to get away from the thought of gardening and into the idea of what are the sort of bigger scale interventions that we can start doing. So, for example, one very simple thing is just to look at our mowing regimes. Are there areas where we can let the grass grow a bit longer? For example, in some of the corners of some of our residential parks, because longer grass actually is a habitat for a much broader variety of insects than well-maintained grass. And I think we also need to think about, are there ways that we can increase the structural diversity in some of our parks and streetscapes, but using principles of ecology? So similar to what the meadow plantings that James Hitchmo and others have developed that were implemented at the Olympic Park in London. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it's the idea of using perennial plants and seed mixes to grow up quite complex herbaceous vegetation with a large diversity of plant species that flower over long periods of time, and they're visually attractive to people, but they also have a wide variety of resources available for other invertebrate species and birds and other animals. But because of the way it's planted, it's broadcast seeding, so you can actually do quite a large area that you wouldn't be able to do if you were planting individual plants. In those landscapes, maybe we need to be having a discussion around what's the importance of origin of plants in what we're selecting. How do we balance being able to provide a healthy and diverse ecosystem under these new and uncertain conditions in the future?